Hi, listeners, and welcome to the Nerds of Business podcast. My name is Darren Moffat. I'm a director of WebBuzz, the growth marketing agency, and I'm your host. It's great to have you with us for the first of our special uncut episodes. As I mentioned in the previous episode, season 1 on branding has concluded, and we're currently in production for season 2. So to tide us over for a few weeks until the product development series begins, we'll be airing a mix of uncut interviews and amazing bonus content from season 1 that no one has heard yet. Today's uncut session features Mike Berland of data marketing firm Decode M out of New York City. Mike is an ex-political pollster from the United States who's worked with the Clintons and some of the biggest names in America. He's now the go-to marketing consultant for companies who want to track and measure their momentum. Now, if you've ever run a business, you'll know momentum is crucial for sales and revenue growth. He's developed a system which he calls the M factor. What Mike has to say about getting and keeping momentum in a venture is essential listening for all entrepreneurs and business owners. If you're a political junkie like me, at the end of the episode, Mike also offers some fascinating insights into the current 2020 presidential election. So stick around for that. I hope you enjoy this special episode of Nerds of Business Uncut.
I love data. I love kind of looking through the data.
You need to have systems, you need to have structure.
You're going to get chopped to pieces. Enthusiasm is unstoppable.
We kind of hit a point where we were like, we need another lever.
Surround yourself with people who are smarter than you and richer than you.
This is Nerds of Business. Well, hi there and welcome to another episode of the Nerds of Business podcast. Today we've got something really special for you. We are really nerding out. We're going heavily into the data. It's a deep dive like never before into nerdiness here at Nerds of Business. And we've got an amazing guest all the way from New York City in America, Mike Berland, who is the founder and CEO of a firm called Decode M. So they're a research and analytics firm, and they've had some really big clients, both in politics, but of course all across business and enterprise, mostly in North America. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. New York nerds in the house.
Look, I've really been waiting for this interview because it's the very apogee of nerdiness, I think, this chat. We're sort of completely nerding out on data. So there's a lot to talk about, and I'm really keen to hear your story. Your bio describes you as a data and analytics guru. For those listeners hearing about you and your firm, Decode M, for the first time today, what exactly does that mean? You know, what do you do in your day-to-day work life?
Well, we actually take data in all its different forms. We decode it and help our clients turn it into momentum for the growth of their business, to help them exceed their goals, to reach new markets. But you know what's interesting, Darren? I started as a political pollster. So the first data I decoded was for politicians who wanted to get elected to office.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, and in politics is the ultimate momentum, because the politicians who win have momentum on election day. And politicians who get the momentum too soon peak out and lose, and those who get it too late lose. So I became a specialist at timing momentum to hit on election day.
Oh, that's so interesting. I mean, I've got two businesses here in Australia, and I'm a big believer in momentum. I'm often talking to my teams about, you can feel it when you're losing it. That's the thing.
Oh my God, it hurts in your stomach.
It does, yeah. And you can also feel it when you've got it. So it is, you've got to manage it. When you don't have it, it's a problem. You're going backwards. You're maybe starting to go into the red. I'm really interested about that journey. I mean, you started in politics. Maybe tell us a bit more about that and how that kind of morphed into working for businesses and into your current business at Decode M?
I always knew that I wanted to be a kingmaker and not a king. And what does that mean? It means a kingmaker helps the king get elected and keeps him in office, whispers into his ears, gives him advice. But ultimately, I knew that the king ultimately gets dethroned and shot. And so rather than be the king, I would be the kingmaker, and I could have many kings that I could work for over my career. And it was an early insight when I was 16 years old.
Wow, that is incredible. You must have been a very interesting individual in the schoolyard. If you're sort of in the schoolyard as the kingmaker, you're either very popular or very lonely, I would imagine.
Well, I lost 2 elections. That's what happened. And so I realized that, and so the kingmaker never loses. The king loses.
Oh, gee, that's a very interesting insight. We could go down that rabbit hole a bit more. We might return to that a little later. I mean, what is it about your psychology, for instance, that draws you to that role? Is it the fact that you're seeing further the lack of ego, relatively speaking?
Early on, I was able to understand persuasion and how people acted and behaved as consumers, as voters, as owners of businesses. And so I was able to translate that into action. So I knew what made people vote. If I knew what made people vote, then early in my career, I could take those lessons from the campaign trail and apply it to business. So if I knew how to make you vote, I could help you be a better consumer and how to choose one brand over another. But what happened along the way is, and now my career has spanned nearly 30 years, which is sort of embarrassing at this point. But what happened along the way is the data changed. So when I was starting out, and I was living in Australia, as Sydney, as I told you, we were doing surveys, asking people questions and getting information back. And the only data that we had was for the questions that we asked. Over time, larger sets of data, behavioral data, consumer data, sales data, all started to become available. And then all of a sudden, when we get into 2005, 2006, all of a sudden social media data now starts to become available. So I no longer had to ask the questions all the time. Sometimes the data was just there for me. I just had to analyze it.
Wow. So that's a really good point. So you're essentially saying, if I understand correctly, that really, I mean, data's always been there. You could always go and get it if it wasn't available. Right. But the rise of the tech giants and the social media platforms have really opened the world of data right up. Yeah.
And I knew it before they did. That was what was great is there were more data sets available 2005, 2006, 2007. Then they started to monetize it and it started to dry up a little bit. And we had to go to different data sets. But in the early days of understanding the power of social conversation, tying that to actual behavioral data, people always talk about big data this, big data that. What a silly name. It's just data, and it's data of what people are doing. And we used to have to, it used to be imprecise, and now it's much more precise. And everywhere we go, we're leaving little data nuggets.
Yeah, well, that in itself is a fascinating question, and we'll get to that in a minute. Before we get to that, how businesses can leverage that, this is potentially a nice segue into your book, your new book. You've written a couple of books previous to this one, and you've just released a book called Maximum Momentum, How to Get It and How to Keep It. I guess I'd start with the why question, Mike. Why did you write this book?
I wrote the book actually for the things that we're talking about. Momentum was used so whimsically by everyone. You have momentum, you've lost momentum, you've got to get your momentum, the big mo, like everybody was talking about it. And yet they talked about it in an emotional, non-specific way. And I'm like, hold on. When I was in high school physics, momentum was you could calculate it. It was mass times velocity. Mm-hmm. Well, why does momentum have to be an emotional? Why is it just what we feel in our gut? Why can't we quantify it? So I sought to quantify momentum using metrics to quantify mass and to quantify velocity. And I turned momentum into a cultural metric called M factor.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so when did you have that insight, or when did you come up with that?
I had been working on it actually for 5 or 6 years. This idea of momentum was so important to me. And the quantification, it actually took a number of years to get the right data set, because you couldn't calculate data on survey questions. You had to calculate momentum on existing data sets. And then I had to write proprietary algorithms to really deal with the velocity. It's easy to measure mass, but velocity, how fast things are moving was actually quite difficult. And so that's where I put most of my effort. And then, as anything, you have to test it for a year to make sure it's working.
And so is this is the point of difference that you bring to your clients, I would imagine, when it comes to data analytics. This is the key competitive advantage that you've developed, yeah?
Yes, our M factor can look back at what your momentum was for the past year, and then nobody has a crystal ball, obviously, but you can then look forward for the next 3 months and see what is likely to happen. And so to quantify momentum and then to be able to compare it against a brand can compare to a person, to a celebrity, became very important.
Great. And now this question might be difficult for you to answer in terms of brands that have global recognition. I mean, if you can skew it more towards kind of globally recognized brands, that'd be great, but I understand if you can't. What brands have captured momentum in 2020? Which brands are thriving amidst the constant crises that we're having in this very weird year?
Well, the number one brands that are thriving, obviously, are the tech brands. Yep. The one we're on right now, Zoom. Who would have ever thought that? I mean, Zoom is clearly a winner of the pandemic. Yep. And the social and business acceptance of video conferencing. A brand that you would not have expected to win the pandemic which is Airbnb. You would have thought it was the end of Airbnb, and actually the world moved towards Airbnb because it gives you such control over your spaces. And then there's some local brands that we've been tracking, which I'll give you a fun one. I don't know if it exists in Australia. Do you have Crocs shoes in Australia? The plastic shoes that you sort of wear on your feet?
We might do. I can't say I'm terribly. I'm sure that you haven't noticed, but I'm not terribly fashion conscious, Mike. So,
but there's a brand of shoes that every medical professional wears. Every person who works in a frontliner in a hospital.
Oh, I know what you mean.
They gave the shoes to all they gave 640,000 shoes away. Mm-hmm. They did a number of collaborations. So this brand that's been around for 20 years and has gone through various points of stagnation is now the hottest brand in the country.
Wow.
And so there's a lot of brands that we see that adapted to the quarantine and to sheltering at home.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's definitely the pandemic has moved the market in such extreme and profound ways, and it's definitely there's now a huge bias towards digital and tech. These, as a student of momentum, these companies already had quite a bit of momentum in place, but it's just accelerated. In the consumer space, and actually in the SME B2B space, the take up of the digital channel. We've noticed it ourselves in our digital marketing business here in Australia. We were battening down the hatches like probably lots of other businesses, going, "Oh my God, this is going to be terrible," and It's gone the other way. It's just
best thing for us.
Yeah. So, staying on the topic of momentum, what are the threats to momentum that leaders and entrepreneurs should be aware of? When the business is potentially sidelined by something like a global pandemic, protests and volatile elections. So what should leaders look for?
Leaders are often very scared to change. And so true momentum requires continuous transformation. And so we say that there's 5 drivers of momentum. There's disruption, innovation, polarization, sticky issues, and social impact. When things are going well for a businessman, they don't want to change it. They will ride it all the way up to the top. And that is death. It's like leaving a party a half an hour early so that you don't wait for the party to come down. You leave when there was still a few minutes more to enjoy. And that's what business leaders need to do. They have to start the next transformation while they're riding the wave of the current one.
Oh, okay, I'll pull you up there because that's a killer point. So your message to entrepreneurs and business people is that this is not a sort of a binary thing. This is you're in a constant state of transformation, that you need to be managing the cycle of momentum. Yep.
Yes, momentum is a very clear cycle of up, you take a step back, you go up higher, you take a step back, you go higher. If you're not willing to take a step back, you will not have momentum. You will go up and then you will come down. And the effort that's required once you start coming down is so hard versus when you had momentum, if you took the step back and went higher, so much easier. Because when you have momentum, people want to work with you. They want to buy your product. They want to, they give you permission to innovate. And if you fail, they'll forgive you. When you don't have momentum, nobody wants to be around you.
The accuracy of that last statement is, I can relate to that. If you don't have momentum, it's people can almost taste it or smell it.
Oh my God, they know it. They can feel it. People want to be with winners, and not that momentum has no moral compass, winners or losers, but they know when you have momentum and they know when you don't.
So I guess a lot of listeners will be really interested in your observations around the steps that entrepreneurs and business leaders can take to pick up the speed and reach that maximum momentum quickly. What can a typical sort of small to medium sized business do for that?
Momentum is agnostic to your size of your business. It doesn't have a moral compass. When you look for business, you have to look at what is that disruption. Yep. Or that innovation that you're going to make. How are you going to polarize and create FOMO, fear of missing out? It doesn't matter if you're a 1-person office or a 1,000-person business. You have to always be looking at that. And even in my business, we have to change continuously. Even the momentum guys have to continuously upgrade the momentum.
And, as I said earlier, a lot of our listeners are small businesses or they're entrepreneurs. And, I think in that cohort, there is, to some extent, almost an idea that data's not for them, or it's a bit irrelevant, or, data's for enterprise-sized businesses. Can you explain why data is important for all businesses of all sizes?
Because data helps you understand the future. Data, people always use data to look backwards, but that's not how I use data. I use data to tell me about the future. Whatever the data that's already happened is interesting, but it's more interesting as I look to predict it. And so in any business, you have to use data to understand what's going to work in the future, who's our target, how are we going to, and then create a plan of how we're going to get there using the momentum drivers. So
to continue on that theme, let's run a hypothetical. Someone's a small business. They've got limited resources, and maybe they've got a team of 5 or 10. What's a concrete example of how they can leverage data to get that momentum? Like what kind of data would they look at, and what would they do with it?
Well, we look at our M factor, which is a measure of cultural relevance, to look at the forces that are going to impact their business, where the opportunities and the white spaces going to be. So you have to use data to understand how is your target audience or your target market changing? What are their needs, wants, and desires? And that's all out there. You don't have to buy that data. You just have to look for it. So I'll give you an example. In the home sheltering or the COVID that we went through, it was very obvious to one of our competitors, to one of our clients, that it was going to be a time of extreme comfort, that people were going to have to be, they were going to be stuck at home and they needed to be comfortable there. And whether it's with pads that go on their chairs, or if it's things that go around their neck, or if there's something that keeps their back straight, but there was going to be a huge market for comfort. Mm-hmm. We had another, our client was focused on sleep. Now, sleep is a good business. Sleep is an evergreen market. We're always going to be looking to enhance our sleep. But there was a market opportunity for comfort all day long, not just comfort. Okay, so the competitor grabs it, sees the opportunity, understands that people are looking for things they've never looked for. Like, I'm sure I never thought about getting a seat cushion at home because I was going to be sitting at my kitchen table on my ass on a Zoom call all day. Never even occurred to me.
Yep.
But it happened, and I'm still there. So that creates an opportunity. So what are the forces? People weren't going to the office. They weren't equipped. Here's an opportunity. All stuff that you could easily observe and sort out, and then see data and understand what the opportunity is and create a D2C opportunity.
Yep. Fantastic. And for your work, inside your business, what are the main data sources that you usually or more often than not turn to?
Well, we use 4 different types of data sets all the time. First of all, I'm a pollster, so we obviously use market research. Mm-hmm. We use social media conversation data. We also use CRM that our clients so Salesforce data can be extremely helpful. And then we use behavioral data. And we bring in 4 different data sources all the time to help make decisions, not overly relying on one. Like, as a pollster, I know that market research data is good at answering the whys, but not always good at identifying the whats.
Okay.
I know that Salesforce data can often help you prioritize your segments, but can't answer what the future looks like. So all of these have to come together, and then you can get a very good answer.
Excellent. And so to sort of take that down again to the smaller businesses with less resources, obviously bigger businesses that have got more resources or enterprise level ventures, great potential clients for you and Decode M. But let's just strip it right down to the smaller business for a minute.
Yeah.
What I'm taking from that, correct me if I'm wrong, is that where businesses can look for data is they can run their own surveys. They can look in their CRM. So they can run some reports, extract some data, get some insights from there. I know from the work that we do here at WebBuzz, they can also look at Google Ads. So you can run.
Oh my God, that's the best data in the world. And Google Trends, Google Ads, that data is basically free.
Yep.
If you're not collecting CRM data, you're not serious.
Yep.
Like you need to have some of that. And those are 2 data sources that should be just at your fingertips without any additional expenditure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And what about Facebook data?
Facebook, if you're buying there and they're giving you data, absolutely. Yeah. Facebook is so wonderful in its ability to be targeted. I was at Facebook in the early days when they were coming up with some of that, and they know everything about you. They can really pinpoint, and so yes, that data is excellent.
What do you think, just on a related side note for a minute? In response to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, Facebook removed a lot of particularly the third party kind of demographic data. And from advertising and marketing perspective, that has, Facebook's obviously still incredibly powerful, but some of that really amazing targeting and profiling has been stripped out of it. Yeah. Well, what do you make of that?
Well, first of all, privacy rules over and above everything. So I think that's the first principle, which is privacy data is important and do no harm. Second, it's a shame that we can't use the power of the data. It will come back. Facebook has to get some further standards in place and have more control. But ultimately, we'll be able, once we get it in a more authentic and validated way, consumers don't mind getting highly targeted ads. They like it because everybody's for instance, everybody loves Google and everybody hates Facebook. Who knows? This is from as long as I've been doing research. Why? They find the Google ad data so incredibly helpful to their day-to-day life. They say Google knows me. And Facebook, over the years, has become a little bit more clumsy. So as we get better, as Facebook gets better, and I think they will because they're a huge machine, the bar is now set. Can you make the data interesting? When you find those marketing companies who know how to use the Facebook platform or know how to use the Google platform as well, that's gold. And you don't pay more money for that. You just get better results.
Yep. Oh, well, that's very interesting. So your view is that a lot of that data that's been stripped out will eventually come back.
I think, yes, it has to come back the right way. Again, Facebook has gone through a number of transformations, but people find value in Google knowing everything about you. They like the ads. They like the other products. Facebook just has to find that utility.
Yep.
But I think it's going to, if you ask me, are we better off in a world where I know everything about you and I can help you live a better life on your terms? Absolutely. So everybody doesn't have to opt into it. But for those of us who want to, we're absolutely going to get the opportunity. But the powerful thing is it has to be my choice. You can't just take my data. I have to give you permission. And when I give you permission, okay, I know what that comes with. And younger generations, Gen Z, millennials, they're very comfortable sharing their data.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. The younger generations are, as a rule, very comfortable with it. But that topic sort of segues again quite nicely into another question I have for you. And it relates to the role of quantum computing and how data is handled in the future. I'm talking about a thing called the singularity, which no doubt you're familiar with. So we might just back up a little bit and explain that to listeners before I ask the full question. The singularity is a theory put forward by very often the top tech thinkers, particularly on the West Coast of America, that it's that moment in time where computers gain consciousness and potentially with the rise of quantum computing, the humans start to lose control a bit of how all this stuff works, and the so-called rise of the robots and so on. So you work in the data space. You're obviously on in that world of data and tech and so on. What's your view on this? Is the singularity something that you think we can see in our lifetime? Do you think we'll see this so-called rise of the robots?
It won't be, our vision of our lives being taken over. It will be living our life on our terms, and things seem to work better together. People always ask me about technology. Is it good that our refrigerator can speak to our oven, can speak to our dishwasher, can speak to the car? Sure, if that's the life that you want. But we're evolving towards that. I don't know what the end state is. Our momentum doesn't get there. But do I see a world of continuous automation to enhance our lives so that things that we want to be better or more automated are, and things that we don't are not, for sure. Do I ever feel like we're going to lose control? No. I think that, but I do see the world going there, and for the most part, I think it's great. Some things are kind of scary.
Yeah, and look, personally, I'm not a big fan of these devices that the smart assistants like Alexa and because they're listening, they're always listening.
They're always listening. You have to wait. Exactly. No privacy.
There's no privacy, but I think the thing that people maybe aren't so aware of is your smartphone's always listening as well. So yeah, like it's the fact that you get ads for a fridge after you've been talking about a fridge with your wife. Yeah. It's no coincidence. Anyway, that's another.
And I have nothing to hide. So like, if Alexa wants to listen to me sing in the shower, enjoy it.
Yep. Okay, Mike from Decode M, the data science guru, analytics guru. We now come to a segment called
Nerd Under Pressure.
Okay, so Nerd Under Pressure. This is you're the data analytics nerd today, Mike, and we're asking for one killer hack or tip you could give to business owners for how to use data to increase profits. I'm going to give you 5-second thinking time. Your time starts now. Okay, over to you.
The number one hack I would give is don't be scared to disrupt and to be polarizing. Oftentimes, business people want to please everybody. And in today's world, you've got to choose your audience and you have to go for it. The best thing a business owner can do is disrupt yourself.
Wow, but that is really a killer hack. So disrupt yourself. So in a sense,
yes.
What you're really saying there, that takes a lot of requires a lot of ability to be self-analytical and to step outside of yourself and see where you are in reality at all times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to disrupt yourself but we know that's the momentum driver.
Yep.
And we know that polarizing leads to emotional engagement with your customers. It doesn't matter if you're the most B2B, you still have to be polarizing because that says, why us? Why choose me?
Okay, so let's just go further down that particular topic. That's highly interesting. Polarization, I know what it is, but how? Give us an example of how a business owner can leverage that polarization, say in a marketing campaign on Facebook or something, yeah?
Well, people always think that polarizing is bad. They think of it as, I don't want to be polarizing because I don't want this on one side or the other. But in marketing, we know that it's really great to be polarizing so that your customers know that you're a brand for them, and the targets who you don't want know that you're not for them.
Yep.
And so polarizing is emotional engagement. And that is the key to success of any brand, B2B, B2C, doesn't matter.
Yep. Fantastic. No, that's a great insight. Thanks for that, Mike.
Totally works. By the way, I live by this. And so like disrupting my own business pisses my employees off all the time because they say, well, you said this and now we're doing that. I'm like, did you read the book? Like we've got to continuously transform.
There's no stopping. There's no coasting. There's no coasting.
There's no coasting because you know what? Our clients will find somebody else.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. Okay, Mike, we now come to another recurring segment called
Nerd Superpower.
So, yes, a lot of work went into that. So this is where we ask you, Mike Berland of Decode M, the data science guru, as a business person, a business owner, what's your superpower? What do you think you bring to the world, to your clients, to your staff? What's that one really killer skill that you've got that adds a lot of value?
I have an ability to take a massive amount of data and to synthesize it into three things that you should know. The data, literally since I was a kid, comes off the page, and the three numbers come out, and I can tell you the news you can use of any data set, 10,000 numbers. I can just look through it and know the numbers. It takes me no time. I think it must be the skill that a musician has when they can listen to a song once and just play it. I can look at a data set and within minutes tell you exactly what you need to know.
So that's amazing, frankly. But when did you start to sort of clock that you had this ability and that it was a bit special?
I think I was I was an intern my freshman year of college, and everybody was struggling. And all of a sudden I was getting higher and higher work because I was so good at it, which really turned out to be horrible because I ended up working all day and all night. One guy, we had a client in Bermuda. And so one of the interns who couldn't, the data didn't come off the page, he got sent to Bermuda, and I got locked up in an office for like 16 hours to do data analysis. But that's when I knew I had it. Yeah. And it's obviously I would have
liked
the trip to Bermuda.
Yeah, but you built a pretty amazing career and, several businesses along the way. So
it definitely worked out.
It's worked out. You've worked with some really big names, as you alluded to, in politics and business. You've done some work with the Clintons, with Mike Bloomberg. Tell us maybe a couple of sort of key success stories that you've had in the world of politics that our listeners can relate to, and how your data insights really move the dial for the client or the candidate.
Well, each candidate, let's deal with those three individuals, because everybody, I think, even where you are down under, everybody knows something about Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Mike Bloomberg. But they were three very different clients who required different insights. So for Bill Clinton, he always had an issue that he was a little bit too far left of the electorate, and he was too progressive. And so the key to his reelection is how did we sort of triangulate between the left, the right, and find that center? And Bill Clinton made the center acceptable to both Republicans and to Democrats, and he won. And then the second issue is he always had very good public values, but his private values were a little bit questionable. I mean, ultimately, he was impeached for an affair with an intern, but before that, he had questionable business dealings and what have you. And so Bill Clinton, how to get him elected and make him acceptable was like, how do we position him into the center? Hillary Clinton was interesting because she was first lady for all those years, and she aspired to be a senator, and ultimately she ran for president. But everybody liked what Hillary had accomplished, but they never liked Hillary. And it was an issue. So how do you respect someone who can get it done, but you don't like her? And so it really turned politics upside down for her senatorial race in 2000, 2006. Ultimately, she lost against Barack in 2008, and she lost against Donald Trump for the same issues, is that people felt like they didn't like her and they didn't trust her. So that was the issue. Mike Bloomberg, who was a very successful business entrepreneur in New York, who when I started working for him, I'd never even heard of him because he was very much in the tech and finance space, and that wasn't my world. But what made Mike unique is he loved data. And the whole Bloomberg system is built on data.
It's built on data.
And so, so the insight from Mike was, there's only 4 million voters in New York. Why do we have to take a sample of them? Why do we have to poll them? We can actually analyze each and every voter and give them a probability of how likely they are to vote for you. And we can identify, you only need 1.2 million voters will vote. You need 600 to win. Let's find the 600 that are going to vote for you. Then we had to position him of why does New York need a businessman and not a politician? So it was three very different uses. So Bloomberg was all segmentation. and targeting. Hillary was all persuasion and getting people who didn't like her to vote for her because they thought she'd be good. And for Clinton, it was repositioning them so that he could be an acceptable choice across party lines.
Well, I seriously could talk about this stuff all day. As I mentioned earlier before we started recording, I'm a massive political junkie. I follow American politics very closely, and so I can't resist. I do have a couple of questions for you relating to.
I had a feeling you would ask me, but I wasn't sure, and I wasn't going to force you. If you wanted to talk about what's the weather doing today, I would have done that too.
No, you don't have to force me, Mike. I'm a willing participant, and so I've got a couple of questions. The first one is actually on Mike Bloomberg. So for someone that is obviously so well resourced, so data savvy, why was his primary campaign such a flop?
Because voters aren't rational. We know this, that voters are completely emotional. And when he was on center stage, he did not appeal to them emotionally. He was not prepared for the questions. Elizabeth Warren really asked him very hard questions, and he gave flip answers, and that turns voters off. Mike Bloomberg, on paper, is the most rational choice. He's run a big city. He knows how to run a business. He's expert on, with the Johns Hopkins School, he's an expert on pandemic health. He is the most rational choice of any candidate there was, but he was emotionally unacceptable to voters, particularly Democratic primary voters. And instead of answering the questions really straight, he disrespected Senator Warren, and he disrespected the electorate, and there's no tolerance for that in the Democratic Party. Mm-hmm. In the Republican Party, with Donald Trump, you would say, well, wait a minute. He does all of those things, and he seems to be doing fine because they have different values.
They have different values. And so a couple of observations I'd make there. I think, firstly, you work in data, but humans aren't rational. Marketing and branding is hugely emotional. Right. So I'm sure that we'll get to that very interesting nexus between the data and the emotion. I'm looking forward to delving into that in more detail in a minute. But the other point I'd like to make is that line that you just said a moment ago around humans aren't rational, and that applies equally to business. And so there's a lesson in that, and I'm sure you spend a lot of your time interfacing with your business clients around that look, here's all the data, but sometimes it's counterintuitive, which leads me to Donald Trump. So it's the elephant in the room. We'll spend a few minutes on this. What's your take on the current lay of the land and the momentum? Because the momentum seems to be shifting a little bit. It seems to be almost like a weekly or fortnightly proposition at the moment, But if you look at the trend line over the last 4 months back to April, March, Biden is consistently ahead.
Yes. And Donald Trump perhaps had the worst June and July of any president in the history of the United States. Maybe the worst June and July of any. I've seen most people be thrown out of office. If they, in your country, they would throw them out of office for sure. They couldn't survive June and July. The country is facing such a pandemic. The economy is going to shit. He's making up stuff. But the key to winning in politics is to have momentum on election day. And what happens before that matters. But it's really how you manage. We know that momentum is a number of transformations that have to happen. So Biden's momentum has gone up and it's plateaued. Yep. So Trump's momentum was high and it went way down, and now it's starting to move up. He's still, we never really know, but I think in my pollster days, I would say he's still trailing, but he has momentum, and Biden is plateaued, which is very bad for Joe Biden.
Wow.
And so what's going on right now is a couple things, Darren, which you might know about Americans. Americans are future-looking people and are eternally optimistic. We have no ability to look backwards, and we have no introspection. It's just characteristics of being American. It's why we got up, we got on the ship, we went to find, we always go west. We always feel we can get in our car and drive wherever we want. But it comes with being American.
Yep.
So Joe Biden is talking about the pandemic, which is, and all the mistakes that Donald Trump made, which is 100% accurate and just been devastating for the country, but it's still looking back. And Donald Trump is looking forwards to the reopening, to getting rid of this. There's a lot of rioting and looting going on as we're going through gender and social justice issues, gender, racial equality. So it's a very interesting time. And so we don't know what's happening. But Trump definitely has momentum, but his momentum is lower than Biden's. A long answer to an easy question.
So, Mike, another recurring segment for Nerds of Business, we put to tradition, we put all of our guests through what we call
The Nerdometer.
Oh, I love it.
It's the Nerdometer, TM, and you'll only find the Nerdometer on Nerds of Business, and it's a pretty simple device. It's really where we're simply surveying our guests, asking them on a scale of 1 to 10 how nerdy they are. Now, Mike Berland, I've got to say, it's been a delight talking with you so far. My take on you is that you are a very articulate, urbane nerd, but nevertheless quite nerdy. So, what do you say? What's your rating, your self-rating for nerdiness out of 10?
Oh, 10 plus. I'm off the chart.
All right, there we go. 10 plus.
Accept it.
He was off the chart. That's excellent. That's I find that that makes me so happy. We love it when someone breaks the nerdometer. That's awesome.
Yes, I would be. You have to own it. For many years, I didn't own it. I own it now. Data's cool now. Like the nerds won, the analytics won, computational, all that. We're the winners.
You're absolutely right. I actually, in writing a sort of little blurb and bio for this this podcast, that's exactly what I said. It's like the nerds have won. Like it's. You remember? I think we're probably a similar vintage. You remember the film from the 80s, Revenge of the Nerds? Do you remember that?
Yes.
And I think 1984, right? So, back then, nerds was pimply faced, uncool, never got the girl, all the rest of it. But now nerds really are running the world, and you don't have to look far to see evidence of that. So, so thank you for having a go on the nerdometer. It's wonderful when we see someone break it. So, Mike, as I said, we are pretty much at the end of the formal questions for today. Do you have anything you'd like me to ask you? Anything I've missed? Do you want to get in any other points before we wrap it up?
No, I really enjoyed all of it. I think I appreciate it's. I've done another podcast from I think the guy was from Melbourne, and it's interesting just how inquisitive and how your market is really leading in so many of these areas. And as I look at our M factor and one thing, your market is such on the leading edge. It's a combination of all this sort of enablement of what's going on in Asia, and then what's going down in the market. And so I just love the interaction, the intellectual give and take, and the rapport and the people I developed. So thank you.